Bevmo property. And one of the planning commissioners said to the person presenting, exactly what size are the trees going to be? Because in your diagram, the trees look pretty small, or they look big, and we want to make sure that when you actually plant them. And so it was an interesting conversation. And so when I asked Jan, she said, I don't really want it to describe the property. I want it to be able to announce to the community that there's something going on that property. And so that struck me as a very interesting reason for thinking about how do we communicate, how does the Planning Commission communicate with people that want to develop, the Planning Department, how do we understand what's going to be developed, how do we keep people honest in terms of what they're developing. And so then just before Christmas, I had the good fortune to sit down with Bill Maston, our speaker, and he showed me some of the latest technology, and he showed me I'll use the word gradations in terms of block and mass all the way down to finer points, but he said, hang on a second, Robin, you don't use the finer points, it's horses for courses, right? And I think that's what he will show you this evening. So I'm delighted that yet again Bill Maston, who is a local architect, and as many of you saw in the announcement, I am just flabbergasted. Now, I've been at this Los Altos Ford for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. Since 1992, Bill has consistently served on a parking commission, a downtown commission, some type of committee, either Mountain View or Los Altos, 1992. Anyway, Bill, you are very generous with your time. Thank you very much, and we're delighted to have you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, I think really the idea that I'm trying to get across this evening is that there are lots of different ways that we can show things three-dimensionally to people. Often I've heard that after the fact someone says, oh my God, that's a beautiful building, the pictures looked horrible. Or just the opposite, they'll go, I thought that building looked great in the picture, but oh my God, it's horrible. Now, beauty's in the eyes of the beholder, and that's true for just about everything in life, but it's definitely also true for architecture. So the benefit that we have that I want to discuss with you tonight is really about how we could apply some of these new technologies, or in this case, new software, that is actually relatively simple to use and has tremendous benefits to everybody who's involved in the process of trying to make the right choices for their town. And in our case, I'm really going to be focusing on the downtown because it is important to me and important, I hope, to all of us here this evening. But I want to start with going back through some traditional ways, meaning ways in the past that we conveyed information to the community versus how we might be able to do that today, and how we are doing it today with different projects in our surrounding community. So I'm going to start just with this, which is also on each side of us, but here's the downtown Los Altos triangle, including the Civic Center, and we've probably all seen this before. But what does it really tell me? In many ways, not very much. Now, we have also seen and talked about gateways in the Civic Center and all of these different things. But again, we're relying on two dimensions to describe something to us. And those two dimensions really limit what we know and what we learn and how we can think about things in 3D. So I'm going to stay here for a minute and talk about this for a minute, because we have different colors that describe information. But how does that information go from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions so that we can visualize it, and more importantly, how you can understand the impact that it has on your community? So for example, on this map, we have the Civic Center area. We have the zoning for the different areas of downtown in different colors. But does that really tell you conveniently or very easily that, oh, by the way, purple means I can build something 45 feet tall? Or that it's limited, the brown is limited to high density residential. So what it really is saying to me, even as an architect, if I'm not familiar with what these different maps mean, I have no idea what it means to be three-dimensionally. I have no idea how it actually affects my community and how it affects the future of my downtown. So that puts us all at a disadvantage. As an architect, I have to cross-reference probably 20 or 30 different documents, study them to understand what it means to me three-dimensionally. So with that, let's fast forward to today. In the last 5 years, so many things have changed that even myself, I'm extremely impressed with how much is available so economically. So thanks to younger guys like AL who comes to our office and says, Bill, let's do Google, let's do SketchUp, let's do all these new products I'm going to, how do I understand what this is? But in no time at all, with this type of young minds, we're transforming my office and we're transforming lots of architects' office and planners around the country. And it's pretty amazing what we can do. So let's start with SketchUp. With Google Earth. Google Earth does amazing things, and some people say from a privacy standpoint, maybe too much. But for the purpose of land planning, we can easily look at what's going on in the downtown area. And we can easily see what's there now, and it can be a great tool in understanding what we can do next. So as the basis of getting started, when you look at your downtown, you can, for example, see the new buildings under construction. You can see the impact that it's having in 3 dimensions. But the bigger question becomes, well, how can we see into the future about how this could be used to actually visualize what we can do in the future? So these, of course, are showing us pictures of First and Main and the new Safeway that haven't been built yet. And we're going to come back and see what happened to them in a little bit as well. But with that being said, what I'd like to do is take you to a project that we did some preliminary feasibility work for in Loyola Corners. Now, we had a client come to us and say, Bill, we are concerned about what's happening at Loyola Corners. We'd like to reinvigorate Loyola Corners, and they have some interest in some of the commercial buildings there. And at the time, they also knew that the new bridge was going to be built or expanded at that point. We came up with some different ideas, and we presented these ideas, but we started first by just taking Google and adding SketchUp to it so that we could actually come up with a 3-dimensional model of the existing buildings and the existing roadways. And so we could actually take from Google and say, well, here's a single-family residence. From the drawings from Google, we could actually say, oh, that's about 18 feet in height. And we can add as much detail as we want, depending on how much time we have, to help visualize what's there. So the idea here, which we happen to really like, but it didn't go very far, was what happens if we look at closing off the existing bridge and making that a pedestrian bridge and just build a new bridge. And so when you came across the bridge, we'd kind of have a roundabout so we could go up into Los Altos Hills, but we'd have a way to bypass the worst traffic jam, or second worst traffic jam in Los Altos, I'm sure. But the idea was we had to be able to visualize that. So before we started adding things to it, we actually then said, well, we want to redevelop this area now that the road's been moved. What could we visualize? How could this be in terms of what we could see into the future? So what we did is we said we're going to have ground floor retail, and we're going to have residential above it. And how would that look? Now, this didn't take us very much time. I just want to emphasize this. This was literally a matter of maybe 2 days of time to do this whole presentation. This wasn't hundreds of thousands of dollars, it was in the thousands of dollars. And so it lets you know that, for example, if you say, well, Bill, you know, I would like to refine this architecture, for sure we can, but then you might also say, Bill, what am I gonna see if I'm at ground level? What am I gonna see if I'm walking? And we can actually walk through these spaces. And even though they haven't been designed yet, it gives us the opportunity to say, you know, maybe this is too tall. Or maybe if we pushed back parts of the building, that it would look better to us. And so we can actually walk down this sidewalk and we can see, without ever building it, what it's gonna look like. That's how powerful these new, you know, softwares are for us. And they're realistic because we're taking the information right off of Google Earth. So we'll leave this concept, and I want to go to another one that we just recently completed in downtown Mountain View. So in downtown Mountain View, there's a very strong similarity to what we are considering on occasion in Los Altos, which is we have some parking lots in downtown Los Altos that may have the opportunity to be developed, especially to service or take care of some parking issues. Now, there's a lot of policy decisions in doing that, but having tools like this will actually help us make the right policy decisions and come up with the right design solutions. So what Mountain View considered was taking these two parking lots and actually developing them into a parking structure and a hotel. The benefit is the hotel's right downtown, right next to the railroad tracks, and it allows a lot of synergy for the downtown, as well as the hotel use is taking place at night, which in most respects reduces the parking demand during the day for office use. So there's some benefits there. So what we did is we actually came up with a scheme in which we had a hotel with some incubator space for a top floor office, and we also had not only the entry of the hotel, but some ground floor retail and convention space. Now, this is actually realistic, or can be, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit, about the things that we do to actually get more and more detail available to us to visualize what we're going to see in the future. So some of the questions that came up for us were, well, is the building going to be too tall? This building is 55 feet, but it's surrounded by other commercial buildings. And sure enough, the general public who have seen this said, oh, well, that's not adjacent to my neighborhood, so those buildings around it actually insulate the building and the height of the building, so maybe that's a good idea. However, if someone says to me, what am I going to see when I'm standing right here, we can go down and we can actually say, this is what you're going to see. We can actually say, well, this looks a little tall. Maybe we could, step the building back right here. We have the ability to do that very early in the design process. So, for example, with the new Civic Center, you'll be able to visualize everything in 3D and not rely on the old-fashioned flat 2D options. As a matter of fact, when you do things in 3D, it may change a lot of your decisions that you were concerned about before. For example, if someone says, I live a block away, am I going to be able to see this? We can go right to their front door or right to their backyard swimming pool and take a snapshot in time and know exactly what they're going to see. And a matter of fact, in a recent presentation where neighbors asked those questions, we went to Google Earth and we snapshot what they would see from 5 different houses around, and all of a sudden there were no longer any concerns. A matter of fact, we went so far as saying, if we place a tree right here at this location, we will block 80% of that view. So we not only use it as a tool for visualization, we're using that as a tool for design solutions. So it's pretty amazing what it can do. This is a project that's actually under construction in downtown Mountain View. This was also done with the same software. We worked with staff on multiple solutions to this project, and we, more importantly, worked with the neighborhood. We actually gave presentations to the neighborhood during the design process, and they came up with questions like, well, maybe we should do something different with this corner. What could we do different? And without actually spending a lot of time, we showed them an option. And the nice thing about how the computer works is the more data we put into it, it's actually faster and easier to come up with more options and more solutions, because it's the initial time that it takes to load the information in the computer that is really keeps us from progressing. But the more you add to it, the faster it works. So with that being said, we've been looking at SketchUp models. But what we then are able to do is take us to the next step in the process, where we can actually start rendering things and making them look more realistic. Now, this is a little bit more realistic, but I'm going to show you more soon that is even more a photographic quality, but it's actually animation. But with this, by adding textures and landscaping, we could actually show the council and the neighborhood what we were going to get. So these differences are kind of important. I wanted to talk briefly about this. This portion of this project actually faces a residential neighborhood. And the tallest building next door, which happens to be an apartment complex, is 2 stories tall. But years ago, the council had actually approved a 3-story height limitation. So by hiding the 3rd story in a dormer, it achieved both goals. But we were able to convey this by using the software. So during the design review process, when these concerns were raised, we were able to solve the problems quite quickly by having this type of opportunity. So let's move on to some other things regarding what's photorealistic or not. So we're going to come back to some more projects that are not even designed and planned yet. The question was asked of us, what happens if you just fill in this whole corner with building? We did no drawings. All we did was take the site plan and start playing with images. So it lets you know that very easily you could come back and say, this isn't what we're looking for. You know, we don't want something that's 4 stories vertical. Now, again, with very little time spent by the architect, we could easily say, well, what would happen in these different directions if we, you know, were to limit it to 3 stories, or stepping it back, for example, with the new project at the end of First Street that's almost ready for occupancy. What happens when portions of it are 4 stories? And I bet you there's not a lot of people that realize that 1/3 of that building is 4 stories tall. I have nothing but great things to say about that architectural firm that did that work, because there's a lot of articulation in that building, and that articulation allows the massing to be reduced. So let's go on to back to Los Altos. So now what we did was put together some ideas for Los Altos, and we've just started the process. So to let you know that this information was put into the computer in less than 5 hours. So what you're going to see now is downtown Los Altos overlaid on Google Earth. So the interesting thing about this, if we could easily add the rest of downtown Los Altos, but it's really a way to let you know that we can easily walk through downtown Los Altos. So if you say, oh, gee, I want to redevelop this building here, we can. And we'll know what it looks like before it's built. We also have looked at some ideas that have been thrown around for a while, and some ideas are good and others fall asleep for lack of being a good idea, I guess. But what we did, for example, we said, well, here's a what if. So we have our existing downtown. So what if we decided to change some of the configurations of the road so we could better connect our civic center to downtown? So you could easily change the road downtown, and let's say we had this, let's say this was a great hotel that just opened, for example. And it was just doing wonderfully, but that the road wasn't there, and we had a nice plaza with lots of activity and people there, and we had actually gone ahead with the concept of doing the roundabout. We can literally walk along this roadway here with this software, and you would know exactly what you're going to see. Now, right now we just have boxes, but with each project that you do, you can add more and more levels of detail. Right now, we're just walking downtown. Of course, it doesn't look like this, but we can easily go back and forth between Google Earth and add detail to the point where this will almost be photorealistic. So the point is that each time you do something downtown, in terms of new construction, you'll know how it's affecting things. Well, but that brings up some different issues. Let's talk about it from a policy standpoint. Right now, Los Altos is considering doing a precise plan for the downtown. And the nice thing about that is it gives us a vision for the future. These tools help give us a vision for the future. So for example, if you want to know what happens if you allow portions of this to be 3 stories tall or 4 stories tall, we could actually add information to show that. Now, if you, for example, think that the building at Safeway is a little big for the site, well, that would tell you that some things possibly happened, that the building was too close to the sidewalk, or that the building could have been stepped back at the 2nd floor. We would be able to visualize that. So, for example, let's say that we decided to add a couple buildings downtown. And I'm limiting these buildings, by the way, to ideas that other people have already brought up. So, of course, we have, I think, in this area, the new Civic Center. I have no idea what it's going to look like. But the point is, we can understand what it's going to look like by using this process. There's also been talk about having a parking garage on one of the parking lots in this area. We also talked about having a parking garage and maybe relocating the bus barn downtown. So that could happen. Well, imagine if we just keep adding layers of detail, and there's an interactive process with the community, we would be able to show in an incredible amount of detail what we were going to get before it was built. And on top of that, people could be interactive with it and say, I live where, and what am I going to see if I'm looking over the back fence, and so on and so forth. So with that, for those of you that might remember, when First and Main was being developed, there was some concern about how that project was being developed. And I took it upon myself at the time, because it did, for some reason, spark my interest. It was the, what happens if we do something a little bit different? Now, as an architect, I'm trained at this, right? So I could actually look at the original drawings, which this is what's basically almost finished being built at this point. And I could say, wow, if I look at what our downtown design plan says. We have a document that's our downtown design plan. It says, it talks about being able to maintain the fine grain elements of architecture that makes it a small town. I can look at this building down here and I can actually say, wait a minute, does this look fine grain and small in scale in comparison to the surrounding buildings? Well, we actually did a little program here that you'll see next that we presented at a city council meeting, and for whatever reason it wasn't well received at the time, and we now have what we have. But the point of it was, we think that there's some other options available. We think that rather than having the building pushed up against the sidewalk, if we change the massing of the building, we could open up a plaza, we could do these very different things that would give us a better understanding of how we can have a gateway to our downtown. Now, granted, perhaps it was a little late in the process and a lot of decisions had already been made, but the point is that this solution had the same amount of square footage and the same amount of parking as the previous plan. So it really isn't a matter of economics, it's a matter of good urban site design and good design in general from the standpoint of massing. So here's one set of masses, and as you just saw a moment ago, there's the second set of masses. This is a simple tool that we could use to design everything downtown. So when we come up with these ideas that say, I don't know whether a portion of town should be 3 stories or 2 stories or 4 stories, I don't know if that's the best thing for us to do. Well, there's lots of economics involved in that, and that's a whole different discussion about the economics of what inspires a developer to build. But from our standpoint, as a city, as a town, is just having these kinds of tools so that we know what we're going to get before we get it. And that we know that if we make a policy decision to do a precise plan downtown, that we can anticipate what that means 10 or 20 years from now. And that's the beauty of all of this. So we've been looking at lots of boxes. And I wanted to show you one more thing before we move on, which is what can happen when you actually do something in 3D that's been almost done photorealistically. So this happens to be a residence, but I have some of these pictures hanging in my front window, and someone asked me if they could have one of the photographs. So we don't spend an extraordinary amount of time on this, but the fact is, if we spent more time, it would literally look like a photograph. But that's where the extra time comes in. But you don't need to get to this level of detail in order to convey what we need to convey as a community about public policy and how we're going to improve our downtown. So I just wanted to let you know, if you want to take it to the nth degree, you can, but as a planning tool, it's probably not necessary. However, when you get to the council level, or to the planning commission level, or the design review level, you probably will want to see this level of detail. You currently require it of us as architects, but each architect has their own way of conveying that information, and some of them never even provide it in 3D. Some of them just provide exterior elevations, and a matter of fact, if you read the ordinances in Los Altos, it's actually normally not required to provide perspectives or things in 3D. Yet in some communities, I'm required to. So it just lets you know that the products are there, and these are all integrated products. So as you go through this policy and you start coming up with ideas that you like, they can be refined to whatever level you'd like them to be. So with that being said, I wanted to go back and just discuss a couple things about what we could be doing next. Now, I want to go backwards for a moment. I want to go backwards in time only 3 years, by the way. And this is how fast things are changing for us. I was told by the city of Mountain View that I needed to provide a little model of the downtown area of this project right here. Okay, and they basically said, Bill, we need a context. We need to know this in context. So this literally took us 100 hours. Okay, and of course we made it out of balsa wood and lots of different things, and while I could show them, and it got us to the point. In the middle of this process, however, you saw earlier, we made this transition into this new software, which allowed us to convey a lot of the same information without having to go through this effort. It's fun, by the way, I love building models, so it is fun. But now, here's where the amazing part comes in for me. And again, I have people like AL who say, oh, Bill, you gotta get a 3D printer. I mean, everybody has a 3D printer, I mean, come on. So, reluctantly I did it. But, and I'm gonna pass this around, this is downtown Los Altos. Okay, I can make this as big as I want. I could make this 10 feet long by 5 feet wide if we want. So imagine now, all we did was take what we put into the computer here, we pushed a button, came back in the morning, and this was done. Okay, so for those that want to look at it, imagine that if we want to have a starting point, and you come back and say, oh, Bill, you know, I'd like to see what that 3-story building looks like. We can now take a section of the model if we wanted, and just have the computer only generate that portion of it, and then we can actually put that new piece in to see what it would look like. So this is a portion of the model that's just been increased in size. So we can, as a community, we can say, let's redesign our whole downtown, or let's keep it the same. Well, you know, we'd be done real quick if we keep it the same, but for the most part, this gives us an incredible interactive tool. It's also a lot of fun because, you know, when we're trying as a community to, you know, figure out what our future is going to be, this is a great tool. So now we have things that we can visualize in 3D on many different levels to any level of detail we'd like, and then we have physical models that we can actually have for those that need to be able to see it in more than one you know, medium. So the real point for us today is just to kind of let you know that we have some readily available tools that will allow us to engage this community effort to come up with a master plan and a precise plan for downtown Los Altos, as well as a way to connect the downtown with the Civic Center. And we can do it in a 3D way, in an interactive way, where we not only have everybody engaged, but that we can actually see what would happen in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and so forth. So the real purpose of this evening is just to let you know that the tools are available for us not to be caught in the quagmire of going, what did I approve? What does that document, that flat document really mean to me? So with that, just open it up for questions if there are any, but yes.
Bill, I can see two kind of immediate takeaways. One is we should, it wouldn't cost us very much, is to change our ordinance to require 3D modeling of this kind at least. The other one is, I think we should ask you to quote, you know, to give us a bid on what it would cost to build this model of downtown. And you know, it doesn't have to be photographic quality, but enough, you know, details so that in the future, every new building we could simulate what it would look like. And or any change in zoning. If, say, for example, on First Street, we want to, in the CDR3 portion of it, where we're proposing a moratorium. If we change the 45 feet limit to something else, or the setback to something else, or whatever, we could simulate what it would look like over time. And
right, so definitely very easily done, and you know, you've seen everything that it can do tonight. What you could actually do is, whether we color code it or not, you could actually say, here's 3 options, and here's the impact of the option. Here's what happens if we require someone to step their building back 10 feet when you get to the 3rd story. All of that is very easily done from a massing standpoint. So that, easily done. Yes?
How about integrating dynamic traffic patterns, both major and minor traffic patterns, public and private traffic patterns? To look at, you know, how this is going to look, let's say, midday, in the evening, in a dynamic sense with these traffic patterns?
Well, the closest thing that I think that is already available is if you go to, like, is it Yahoo Traffic or something? What's the program you use? It basically gives you the traffic anywhere around the Bay Area, or, you know, you just hone down in on it and it'll be in green, yellow, or red, the traffic, and you can snapshot that by time of day.
But I meant in terms of getting the dynamic view with that traffic patterns integrated with this.
So explain to me a little bit more what you mean by dynamic traffic patterns.
What I mean is, let's say at 7:45 in the morning, I can see this view from any perspective, you know, in a 3D perspective, and see how traffic, how it looks in a heavy traffic environment, how it might look in an evening and or dusk light traffic environment, which one, you know, and look at it in terms of the major traffic patterns. I'm keeping it simple: major traffic patterns, minor traffic patterns, because this would give me, you know, another perspective, another view of the total environment.
I know that we would have the opportunity to do that just by integrating some other softwares with this that are already available. It's whether or not you actually want to see cars or have, you know, snapshots in time with different traffic on it. That would be a different discussion. What I'm learning is it really is all possible. It's just how much time and effort do you want to put into that versus the value you get in making a policy decision about, you know, the changes you want to make to downtown. So, but it is doable. I'd want to scratch my head a little bit about the most efficient way to do it, though. Yes?
So as different zones, the CRS zone, let's say it had a building height of a X number of feet, you could plug that in and find out what the total square footage for the area would be, and then you could decide what the parking demand would be. Oh, that means if we develop parking lots 1, 2, and 3, and the height is 40 feet versus 30 or 34, that's going to create a different parking demand square footage, right?
Yes,
based on what type of use it is. And so you could do those type of plannings and get a result based on the model and see what it would like.
A great question. So here's something that could, you know, we could do quite readily. These are basically, for the most part, 1-story buildings. We know the approximate square footage of each one of those. So we could actually say, oh, if that becomes a 3-story building, we just added 5,000 square feet per floor. So we just, if it's 3 stories, we added 10,000 square feet. We multiply that by 4 employees per 1,000 if it's office, let's say. And, you know, oh, we have 40 new employees. Therefore, we have, you know, 39 new cars, or whatever the answer is. And yes, we can project that. Now, also what's interesting is we can project the increased benefit to the community through a tax base. We can project the amount of income that could be derived by the number of people that are going to lunch. yeah, 40 new people a day working in a building, that's 40 new lunches 2 to 3 days a week. So you can actually anticipate how there's a direct financial model we could couple to this so that as your city grows, the financial model grows with it. And there are people that specialize in doing that. And so if you were trying to look for a healthy city or a healthy town, you can actually anticipate through this modeling not only how big it would have to be, each structure would have to be, but when that point where the synergy takes over, where this city becomes kind of alive in its own right, because there's enough diversity of uses throughout time of day and evening and so forth. And that's how a lot of cities, for example, come up with establishing their building heights and their zoning ordinances, because they're actually trying to achieve a certain density so that their city's self-propelling. And that can all be done.
So how does that relate to human scale?
Good point. Well, it does in a human scale on a streetscape standpoint is affected in a number of ways. And I'm not trying to say anything positive or negative about the most recent buildings built, but one of the things about the most recent buildings built on First Street is that they're very close to the street, so that human scale changes. And it actually, in some ways, makes the building feel like it's crowding you in. Now, when we go down Main Street, it's very broad. And you could actually, let's say, add a second story or maybe even a third story on a street like on Main Street, because it's so broad, and if you had increased setbacks on higher floors, the openness will still remain. So we can use all of these tools to help determine whether some parts of downtown should have less or more, right? And whether the setback should be increased in order to allow buildings to get taller, but still maintain the openness or the human scale that you're speaking of. So we can definitely use all of these tools to do that. Yes?
Well, as you put in these new buildings and bring in 39 new employees, for example, then you are going to have the impact on traffic, which is what the gentleman was talking about, and the just the look and the feel of the city. It's more than just architecture. It's more than just buildings. It's how livable is the city with as it grows.
Yes.
So I don't know how you factor in. You need some open space, some public space, some park space. You need something to make it remain a livable city.
You need all of those things, and as part of that policy of creating open spaces or trading things, meaning with developers sometimes, where you tell the developer, you know, if you'll move your building back and you'll open up this space for us, then you know, we'll allow you to build a portion of your building taller or something of that nature. But you can't, it's hard to do that without having these tools to help you visualize what the trade-offs are. So, but it's definitely doable, and it's a great thing for helping create your public policy about how to go forward and what's the right, you know, densities and so forth in the downtown. So, yes?
Hey, Bill, are there any cities that you know that require developers to present this kind of information, 3D modeling, as part of the planning process?
Well, I'll just say this. After the second time I did a presentation like this for one of our own projects, I actually had an architect come up to me and say that it was unfair because they didn't have the software, right? But all, you know, the architectural community is catching up quite quickly. Because what happened, just to finish that story briefly, is after I gave this presentation, they actually told him he needed to do a 3D presentation. And so, yes, he was taken off guard, but I'm sure he went on to, you know, do what he needed to make the presentation in the future. But yes, there are a growing number of cities that make it a requirement that you have to present in 3D. It doesn't need to be full motion animation, but it definitely needs to, you know, have snapshots of, in 3D perspectives that allow you to see things from, you know, critical points. So, yes?
Well, in these images, which are great, you can see the existing buildings three-dimensionally, but when you went to modeling, the existing building all went, the satellite imagery all went flat. Is there a difficulty in merging those two?
Well, what we do, if we go flat, we actually, Google has a little measuring stick where we can actually go in and measure the height, so we're relying on Google for those initial measurements. But what I would say is if we got closer, for example, to a project that's of interest to us, then we would add more detail as we got closer to that project. And then over time, because we're going to save all this, you know, the city's going to hopefully have a database of this. Every time a new project is built, we have the old project, you know, and then we keep adding and adding and adding to it. So I hope that answered your question. Google actually has tools within to allow us to get very accurate dimensions. They say, what, 6 inches or something? Yeah, within probably 6 inches. So anyway, I think that's about it this evening. So thank you very much for coming and being a part of it.
Thank you. Robin, Avery, and I are playing tag team tonight. She had to run off to the airport to pick up a daughter. So thank you very much for doing this. Thank you all for coming. Look forward to future Los Altos Forward community conversations with this nature.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.